I'm not really built to, get better at conditioning, or I'm not really built to go for long distances.
People say that, built for it. I'm like,
when they say that, it's always like, oh, I'm conveniently built to not do this thing that would make me better. Conditioning and zone 2 cardio and a lot of that stuff outside the mat is getting really popular. There's no rowing workout, there's no running workout, there's no stadium and hill runs that you could do that perfectly matches how you feel when doing jiu-jitsu.
What do you think are some safe ways for someone to do some conditioning?
What are your thoughts when you hear people talk about weight cutting when it comes to jiu-jitsu and jiu-jitsu competition?
90% of the time, my answer is just don't do it. Weight cutting does nothing to help improve your performance. And there's a lot of things that you can do to cut weight if you need to, but it should be on an as needed basis. For anyone listening that's interested in starting jiu-jitsu, or maybe you just started jiu-jitsu and you are feeling a little bit overwhelmed, is just to focus on like one controllable variable at a time, and then just give your best effort with everything else outside of that.
Has it been a year already, Josh?
It's been a year.
Dude.
365 days. I checked this morning.
That's crazy.
July 5th every year.
Yep.
Why did we pick July 5th?
I don't know.
Is it just the first time you ever...
Well, last year I had said that on July 5th was when I officially got hired at Slingshot in 2018. I think you had texted me or something, said like, welcome to the team. And I was like, who's this? I don't have your number saved.
What team talking about?
And they're like, this is Smelly. And I was like, all right, I guess I got the job. So that was on July 5th, 2018. And then every July, basically since then, something significant has happened. So then last year, we decided, okay, every July 5th, we'll do a podcast.
Yeah, it's on the calendar, and you just, it's repeating every year. So, yeah.
For all eternity.
What's you're always like into something. You always got something going on. You're always learning. What's your like reading or watching, or because we share videos back and forth here and there. Like, what are you into right now?
Coincidentally, Go Super Brain, Andy Triana tagged us in a video this morning. And I've been studying a lot of his stuff recently after he was on the podcast with you guys and
incredible.
And Joe and Jake. It really blew my mind and really shook me up in a great way. And so I had purchased a consultation call from him shortly after that podcast came out. And so I've just been trying to look at all the stuff that he's been talking about. When I talked with him, he had suggested a couple different ways of beginning to learn some of that information. And I think a lot of times people will look at a podcast with someone who's so insanely intelligent, like Andy or like yourselves, and I
wouldn't put us in his category. It's okay to leave him by himself.
Okay. So maybe just Andy. But they'll look at some of those people who have all this information and they'll just think of like questions that only have one answer. Like, is creatine good for me? Should I do this? Should I do that? And instead, I think people could get so much more value if they ask those people, what were the ways you acquired that information? And how would you suggest I acquire that information in a faster time that you did? So you could take this example, like jiu-jitsu. We trained with Cassio Warnick. He's been a black belt for, I think, over 20 years at this point, world champ. I could just ask him like, Cassio, what do I do in this one position right here? And I'm sure he has an amazing answer for me and could help me out. But a better question would be, how did you learn to stop people from passing your guard? What were the principles of your guard that you really focused on to not let anybody get past? What were the principles you focused on when passing someone's guard if you're in top position?
And what do you do when he says, I never even thought about it?
You're pretty screwed.
Sometimes the best do that to you and you're like, God damn it.
There was one time where this was when I was a white belt and I was rolling with Tyler Bray. He's been on the podcast before. For those of you who don't know Tyler Bray, he's a pro bodybuilder and a jiu-jitsu black belt. And he has spina bifida, so he doesn't have any use of his legs. And we were rolling right in front of Cassio's chair. And so I knew Cassio was watching. And Tyler tapped me with the same move probably 3 or 4 times in a row. And so I just looked up at Cassio. I was like, Cassio, what should I do? And before like I could even finish the question, he's like, there's nothing you could have done. Just deal with it. And
you're outmatched, son.
Yep, you're off the team.
So. I dig it. Any books you checking out lately?
Yeah, I'm rereading The Oxygen Advantage by Patrick McEwen. I'm also revisiting Joel Jamison's book, Ultimate MMA Conditioning. He was on the podcast a year ago, maybe a little less than a year ago. But kind of along that lines of subjects I'm diving into would be diving more into conditioning. I was telling a friend of mine that I feel like I have a really solid base of strength knowledge, and kind of the different theories around developing strength, especially for athletics, but conditioning, not as much. Like, it's a very rudimentary base of information. And sometimes, and maybe you guys have felt this way too, you have like intuitions on how you should train, but you can't really explain to someone asking why you're doing what you're doing. And so if someone were to ask like, hey, why are you doing 15 seconds really, really hard on the Echo bike or a fan bike and then resting for 45 seconds? It's like, well, I knew that when I took this course in college and read this thing, these were the work to rest ratios they recommended, and I can't really explain it beyond that. And so sometimes when I run into those issues, I'll go back and think like, okay, what book should I be reading to have a better understanding of that particular question? And then in pursuit of that, you know, you learn new things, or maybe you change your perspective a little bit on something, and then you can make advancements going forward, and then ultimately be training a little bit better, be able to help more people out, and go from there.
I think it's cool that the books that you're diving into are training oriented. I know that you dive into other books as well, but I find that to be fascinating, because I think that sometimes when people think of reading, they kind of only think of certain types of books. Like maybe somebody's thinking of like self-help, you know, personal development type stuff. And those things are great to read. But if you read the thing you're truly interested in, it will help with personal development a ton anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I try to alternate between like 3 different types of books. So one will be just strictly training. It could be a textbook. It could be something like The Oxygen Advantage. It could be something like even like Jacked and Tan, the book you wrote. It could be something like that. And then it'll be a personal development book. So a book by Ed Milet or Napoleon Hill or something along those lines. And then the third one would be something just for fun. So like a comic book or Dune or something like that. So that way there's kind of like a fresh rotation. So once I spend a lot of time reading about training, it's like, I'm not really sure if I'm at capacity to download a whole bunch of more training information. It'll be personal development information. Then once I kind of get used to that, I'll be like, all right, let's really change it up and learn about space and space worms. And then we'll change it up again and go back to training and go from there.
How have you ended up adjusting some of the ways that you do handle like the conditioning of yourself and your athletes? What are some concepts that you try to keep in mind?
Some things that really shook up my perspective on conditioning was the nasal breathing that everyone listening to this podcast has probably heard you guys talk about 1,000 times over. But that was really big and really opened my eyes to, okay, it's one thing to like go for a run or do intervals on a rower or do intervals on a bike, and it's another thing to do jiu-jitsu, but breathing is kind of the common denominator in all of those things, and breathing is a common denominator in basically every activity that we do. And so learning about nasal breathing really opened my eyes up to how conditioning can be improved. And I've spent a lot of time, you know, thinking about only focusing on nasal breathing and haven't really focused on some of the other ways that breathing could be done, especially with conditioning. I think you had sent me something from not Patrick McEwen, Brian McKenzie, about being very deliberate with how many inhales you're taking in and then actually exhaling out of your mouth, and how there's there we go. So yeah, that's like a good example of stuff I've been doing for a long time now, is just doing all conditioning, focusing on nasal breathing. But I think there also is something to, at least for me, to learn more about, especially when it comes to breathing out of your mouth to unload some of that CO2. Sometimes it could be a little limiting to try to blow CO2 only out of your nostrils when you could do it out of your mouth. Again, there's a time and place for that. And so that's really what I've been trying to focus on learning more of is, okay, is there a way that we can train conditioning to teach athletes, this is how you know when you need to focus on nasal breathing. This is when you need to do a couple really hard exhales out of your mouth to try to offload some of that CO2 and then get back to nasal breathing. And so those are some of the ideas that I've been playing around with, and hopefully we'll be able to have enough of an understanding to where, I think you had mentioned Brian McKenzie does this, where he calls out commands as a coach, and whether it's in a game or in a fight or in a match, someone could say like, hey, like give me 2 hard exhales out of the mouth and then get back to nasal breathing, and be able to help athletes that way.
It's really hard to calm down once you get your heart rate elevated pretty high. Something that happens with running, and one of the reasons why they encourage runners to do a lot of their training in this kind of, I guess you'd say like steady state zone 2 cardio, which would be approximately 180 minus your age. There's other ways of figuring it out, but basically you're keeping your heart rate relatively modest. And as you get in better condition, obviously the heart rate can go up, or I'm sorry, the intensity at which you're running and the speed at which you're running can go up, but your heart rate is still going to remain low. What I've noticed on certain runs is that once I get if I start doing like a heart rate of like 150, I could still do the nasal breathing stuff, but then it gets to be like pretty challenging. And then once I kind of open my mouth, and once I do like kind of a normal breathing in the nose, out the mouth, it's really hard for me to get back. Even if I slow way down, and I was always kind of confused by that, but some people kind of told me that once you start using like the type 2 muscle fibers, the fast twitch muscle fibers, that it's hard for the body to go back. Once you kind of went into those more explosive muscles, it can really be a real drain on the system. And so it has an overall like hit on you. You kind of just think about if you did like 4 hill sprints, it has a little bit of a cost if you were trying to go on a half-hour run after doing even just 4 hill sprints. Not a lot, it's not a crazy amount, but 4 hill sprints at like 80% is probably going to lead to your heart rate being exponentially just a little bit higher during the entire run, even if you tried to calm yourself down. Even if you gave yourself 10 minutes to try to chill, your heart rate would probably still be elevated a little bit.
Interesting.
So it's tough.
Yeah. What you've been doing with running has been super helpful in this process, because you're someone that has come from such a huge strength background, and then to see the transformation that you've had and being able to develop your conditioning kind of takes out all the excuses for everybody else that doesn't really want to work on their conditioning. It's like, look, Mark squatted over 1,000 pounds, benched over 800 pounds, and ran a marathon. So everybody that says like, oh, I'm not really built to, get better at conditioning, or I'm not really built to go for long distances.
I hear people say that, built for it. I'm like,
yeah.
I don't know.
And when they say that,
not what I'm built for.
When they say that, it's always like, oh, I'm conveniently built to not do this thing that would make me better.
I dig that.
Yeah. What's your take on, because something I hear often around the mats for getting mat cardio is to just get on the mats, but you're doing a bunch of stuff off the mat and it seems like it's working. So what's your take on that statement? I
think I'm 100% in line with that. The vast majority of your jiu-jitsu conditioning should just be jiu-jitsu training. I think there's like a trend now where conditioning and zone 2 cardio and a lot of that stuff outside the mat is getting really popular. And so the messaging is kind of shifting to like, you can't just roll and expect your conditioning to get better. And it's like, well, that's true. But at the same time, if you're taking time off of jiu-jitsu to focus on your conditioning off the mat, I mean, if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But you can really build a huge base of conditioning by just rolling more often. And whether we want to consider that actually improving your conditioning or just improving your efficiency on the mat to save your energy over time, I think that's important to differentiate those two. If you did a VO2 max test and you only did jiu-jitsu and then tested your VO2 max test, say 3 months later, maybe it would improve a little bit, probably not a lot. But if you just looked at how fatigued you would get the first time you took the test versus how fatigued you would get in jiu-jitsu the second time you took the test, that you'd probably see some huge improvements. And a lot of that comes from technical efficiencies. A lot of that comes from just knowing from a tactics perspective, okay, when do I need to push hard in this scramble to get position, or when can I just hang back and chill for a little bit and then make a big push to establish another position. So with conditioning in jiu-jitsu, just rolling is great, and your base of conditioning should just be just rolling, because there's nothing that's going to perfectly replicate the physical demands of jiu-jitsu except for jiu-jitsu. There's no rowing workout, there's no running workout, there's no stadium and hill runs that you could do that perfectly matches how you feel when doing jiu-jitsu. So the majority of your time should be in jiu-jitsu, and then sprinkle in conditioning pieces outside of jiu-jitsu based on what your weaknesses are. If you can sprint really hard just one time in a scramble and then you're completely gassed after that, okay, use that as information to determine maybe I should work on some repeat sprintability stuff outside of jiu-jitsu. If you can roll for a really long period of time, but you just feel like your strength is gone, you don't really have much to give in those later training rounds, okay, maybe work on building up your base of general physical preparedness. So that way your base of fitness as a whole is better. So that way you're better able to use strength in later training rounds and for longer durations of time.
When you're actually like training to try to bring your fitness up, or you're trying to get stronger, the nice thing about going into a gym environment is all the controllable variables. And then so you could say, going to class is like a little bit uncontrollable. Mm-hmm. I guess you can figure out who you can go against and stuff like that. And so you can control some of it. But trying to mimic it is probably not a great idea, trying to bring like a 200-pound dummy to the to the track or something, and trying to like load it on your back and run around with it or something. The cost of that, like, that still might be good exercise.
Sign me up.
Yeah, it might be a good exercise, but the cost of it is going to be too much. It's going to make you sore, and just
definitely.
It's just you're getting into like things that are probably unnecessary. So it's like, just do your sport, and then also hit the gym. Like, why not hit the gym? Why not do a little bit of both? Because going on like an assault bike or something like that, the variables are so controlled. You can determine how hard or how fast you want to sprint. You can look at the watts on there, and you say, all right, well, I don't feel like I got crazy energy today. I'm just going to bump it up to like 500 watts each time and try to hold that for like a 10-second count. And then you can get whatever prescribed rest. Whereas like if we're rolling together and you're trying to blow me up, you're dictating the pace, and I have no control over how much rest we get,
Yeah, absolutely. You brought up a great point earlier, and I think, kind of circle back to your question, Andrew, I think the concept of using rolling as your primary form of conditioning is great for beginners. And then as you gain experience over time, it's probably not the case, mainly because we see black belts that, if we had to guess their fitness level, we'd guess that their fitness level is pretty trash, but they could roll for 90 minutes straight and not get tired. And that has a lot to do with their efficiency. It has a lot to do with their skill. And so for beginners, it's like, spend time in the gym, building your conditioning, and get a lot of mat time, like get a lot of experience on the mat. And then if you're a black belt and you've been training for a decade, it's like, well, how tired are you really going to get training jiu-jitsu? Maybe not that tired. Okay, maybe you need a lot of extra conditioning in the gym, or maybe you need a lot of extra conditioning just off the mat, something that's going to take you out of your comfort zone, something that's actually going to make you work pretty hard. Because in jiu-jitsu, your efficiency is so on point and your technique is so clean, you don't really get tired as often as compared to a white belt or a blue belt that thinks every match is the finals of the biggest tournament ever.
Yeah. Or, I mean, it is going to be harder for that black belt too, but like those individuals, if they can make sure that they can work with people that are pushing them. Yeah. Because, as you get older, maybe you don't want to train with those types of people, but if you are trying to improve, if you can work with people that push you, your conditioning will still end up getting pushed, but you'll definitely have to hit that later if you're not working on that currently.
Does anything change? Because I'm just thinking, like wrestlers, their conditioning seems to always be through the roof. And I really got first front row seating of this when I started doing takedowns. I do what's considered, I've been calling like old man jiu-jitsu, where like, all right, you want to roll, cool, slap hands and we sit down, so nobody's really standing up. But for competition, I had to gain that experience. And so I hired a coach and we did a lot of stand up, and he's laughing because we're only going for like 15 minutes. And he's just like, dude, ever since I was like 5 years old, we went 45 minutes. He's like, so, we got to build this up. And so I'm just curious, I don't know if this is much of like a white belt question, but like, is there a difference there in regards to like grappling jiu-jitsu conditioning versus like stand-up game? Like, is there anything different that you can do to help propel that conditioning? 100%.
And that's a great question. And I've thought about this a lot. And I think a lot of those differences has to do with the rules of the sport. There's not a whole lot of rules in jiu-jitsu around stalling. And so if you're tired, you always have an opportunity to just like hold someone in a certain position until you're ready to move again. In wrestling, they are so against stalling that if there's a period of time where there's no action, they immediately start calling stalling warning, stalling warning, and then they'll dock you a point. And not only are they highly against stalling, but the matches are shorter. And so just everything about the way the rules are constructed for wrestling is all about action and is all about pushing a pace as hard as you can for 6 or 7 minutes, depending on whether you're competing in high school or whether you're competing in college or internationally. So I think a lot of the conditioning just has been a byproduct of the way the game is played compared to jiu-jitsu. but also trying to do everything standing on the feet and having someone hang on your head constantly and like, sprawling up and down, up and down, up and down. That is a way more exhausting activity as opposed to laying on your back and just having to move your legs and just make sure no one gets past your hip line. You can relax a lot in that position. So I think it's a combination of both. Like, the sport itself has created an amazing way of training to develop some insane conditioning. The rules have done that as well. Just the activity of wrestling being a sport that's really based on two people starting in the standing position, and the goal is to control the other person in a way that is impossible for them to escape. Jiu-Jitsu is a little bit different. You don't necessarily need to control and hold that person down. You just need to submit them. And you could submit them off your back. You can submit them from top position. You could submit them where you're in the middle of a scramble and kind of jump on their neck and grab something. And then as you're falling down, they tap. So the rules, I think, definitely have an impact on that.
So you have a hot date coming up and you look in your closet and all you see are the old, ugly clothes that you usually wear and you're going to wear tonight. It's time to end that, guys. That's why we've partnered with Viore Clothing, because they have some amazing athleisure clothes that you can wear in the gym when working out, but also clothes that you can wear on a date or during Hanukkah or whatever. You can wear these clothes wherever and they feel amazing. Some of our favorites are the Ponte Performance line, which has dream knit fabric, which literally feels so soft on your skin. But they also have this. This is the Rise tee. Also soft, also feels nice and fits great. And they have a lot of amazing clothes that you need to check out to step your fashion game up. We're trying to help you out. Andrew, where can they get it?
Yeah, absolutely. You guys got to head over to viori.com/powerproject. That's VUORI.com/powerproject, and you'll automatically receive 20% off your order. Links to them down in the description as well as the podcast show notes.
What do you think are some safe ways for someone to do some conditioning? Because maybe for some people, maybe going out on a run's like maybe it's not the first place to start. Maybe you got to take your time getting into that.
Yeah, that's a great question, because for those who don't know, Mark has been asking me to go on a run with him for probably the last 12 months, and I only did it maybe a month or two ago. But I knew he was asking, and when you first asked me, I don't think I was in any position to be running. I'd been working on my conditioning on the Concept 2 rower, on the fan bike in the gym, which is the one has the arms and the pedals, and you could use at the same time. But as far as like doing stuff where I'm putting a lot of impact on my ankles and knees in that way, I hadn't really been doing much. And so I knew that, okay, if I want to run, even if it's just like a pretty chill 30-minute run, I should probably get my feet, my knees, and my ankles set up to be able to handle that. And so if you're in a position similar to what I was in, where you're not necessarily in good enough shape to just be slamming these 30, 45-minute runs, you can still do a lot of great conditioning on some of these other pieces of equipment, like a Concept 2 rower, a fan bike, a ski erg. And what's great about those is that all three of those machines are concentric only movements. So there's no eccentric loading, there's no impact forces, there's no deceleration that you have to do when you're doing those things. On the rower, you can just get a big pull and then kind of chill as you feed the chain back into the machine. When you're using the fan bike, you're just kind of cycling and pushing forward. You don't necessarily are like dropping every step on your ankles and knees every time. And so you could do a lot of conditioning and get a lot of volume with some of those machines, and your body's probably going to be able to bounce back and recover pretty quickly. While you're doing that, if you want to eventually run, which I think is, if you want to run, that's great. You definitely don't have to. But implementing some form of foot training, something to strengthen up your ankles, your knees, and then even look at your running technique, something that you showed me a lot of when we were running together. I wasn't even really thinking about my running technique, but you had taught me some things about like not trying to overstride, certain things with even your shoulders and how you set your back position to make sure that things are moving efficiently and in good position. So, I'm sure a lot of this stuff is on YouTube, but just taking some time to say like, okay, if I want to run and use running as a form of conditioning for my jiu-jitsu, probably should work up to that. There's things I can do in the meantime, and then go on YouTube, watch some videos on how to run more efficiently, watch Mark's videos on how to run efficiently, and go from there.
Yeah, running's a big skill. Like, I think it's a great thing to use for conditioning, but the amount of time it takes to actually build the skill, like build the technique of running, it's like if you can put in that time to invest in it, you'll reap a lot of rewards in the long run. But it is much easier to go on an echo bike or a rower, because just the amount of time it takes to learn how to do that effectively, and then to really be able to push yourself, like push your intensity on that effectively, it's going to be like a fifth of the time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we've all been there before where we've sprinted before we were in good enough shape to sprint and we pull our hamstring. You're not going to pull your hamstring on a rower. You're not going to pull your hamstring on the fan bike. You could really like go as hard as you possibly can and you're probably not going to mess yourself up, which is pretty huge because if training off the mat is all designed to assist and improve our performance on the mat, anything that we do that begins to have a negative impact on what we can do at jiu-jitsu, we need to double check and make sure, like, is this really benefiting me? If I do these sprints and I pull my hamstring because I'm not ready yet, what am I doing? Am I trying to get better at pushing at a high intensity for like 10 seconds? Do I need to sprint? Probably not at this point if my hamstrings aren't in good enough shape to handle that. But I can sprint on an echo bike. I can sprint on a rower. I can sprint on a ski erg. It's kind of similar to the conversation you and Jimmy and I had about Olympic weightlifting. Olympic weightlifting movements, the snatch and clean and jerk, are awesome. They look sick. They post all these slow motion videos on Instagram and they look dope. You know, watching Dmitry Klokov snatch all these crazy weights is like, man, I kind of want to do that. But the time it takes to learn how to do that and then build strength just in that movement is going to take a really, really long time. And there's all these great alternatives like kettlebell stuff, Alex Kanellis's Landmine University stuff, where you can get similar benefits and begin reaping those benefits in a fraction of the time.
I will say though, and this is just a personal goal because Mark has mentioned this before, that it would probably be good for me to do more running. I think, you know, because I do a lot of conditioning on the echo bike and I'll use the rower, but I do think if I built a better capacity to run, that would have overall, even though it'd be a little bit more fatiguing and it would take me a longer time to become extremely proficient at where it wouldn't fatigue me as much, I think that would have a long-term carryover into something like jiu-jitsu as far as like the standing aspect of it and the conditioning aspect of it. Because like on the rower, you're seated. On the ski erg, you know, you're kind of like this, but it's like running is a type of cardio that gets everything moving together. There's jogging, there's running, and then there's sprinting. And then if you can get yourself to the point where you can sprint 70, 80% fairly proficiently, you can train that and it doesn't fatigue you. Like, you have to get good at it for not to fatigue you. I think that is a long-term skill that has much more benefit, just as a thought, than the echo bike, the ski erg, and those types of pieces of equipment. What do you guys think about that?
I agree with that 100%. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Kelly Starrett talked to you about this. If there's something, if you're like trying to be the best in your sport at a specific skill, but in pursuit of that skill takes away from just other things that you should just be able to do as a human, you may not be able to reach your highest potential. So and this is what I think you had told me about. Kelly had looked at your hips and stuff and basically said, like, if you can't move in this position, I know you're not required to in a powerlifting meet to move your hips this way, but being able to move your hips a little bit better can help you squat a little bit more, even though that's not the demands of your sport. And even though the demands of jiu-jitsu don't require us to be able to sprint at 80, 90% for 10 seconds, you'd run out of bounds, and that's not part of the sport.
Like, where's he going?
Yeah, I gotta go. But if you're physically capable of doing that essential activity as just part of being a human, that can help build a bigger base for you to perform better in your sport, even though it's not necessarily a demand of your sport. So I agree with that. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I think some of it is like capacity driven, you know, having a over capacity. You think of
running out of bounds.
You think of like football players that get that cowboy collar, that tackle from behind where they're and some guys have had both their knees blow out from that. Some guys have hurt their back, their neck, their knees, all kinds of stuff just off that one way that people used to tackle people. They just don't allow it anymore because it's just dangerous, but it still kind of happens here and there. And the guys that it happens to, the guys that have an overcapacity for a particular type of movement, they're not going to get hurt that way. In the same way with jiu-jitsu, sometimes somebody going for certain moves might hyperextend, or it might dislocate a knee or something crazy on one person, and for some reason, another person could roll right over on that leg and not feel anything. Maybe just because of something they worked on, maybe a genetic component, but they have the mobility there that's allowing them not to get hurt.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think, is it Chad Aikes or Chad Ikes? He's a great example of this. He fell with a bunch of weight. And maybe Andrew, you could pull up the video. This guy, he was in a powerlifting meet. I don't know how much weight, but it was a ton of weight. And he missed the lift and
fell. Like 1,100 pounds or something.
It was crazy. And he fell in this insane knees over toes squat position and got up and walked away. And to my understanding, he wasn't too messed up.
He just had some, he had some bruising, like from because he got stretched way backwards. And he just had some bruising, but he wasn't even in pain. Like someone had to tell him like, oh, you got some that's discoloration right there. He's like, oh, really? But he didn't notice anything. I mean, this guy, he was doing like splits and all kinds of stuff. He was very, very mobile. So it makes sense that he was able to get past that. It's actually kind of interesting. Like, if we get a shot of it here. This is APF Senior Nationals. This was actually the same contest that was filmed for Bigger, Stronger, Faster.
That's an enormous man.
But look at
boom.
Ooh.
Yeah, the weight was on him for a bit there, and he got extended backwards. That must have been brutal. It is interesting that running is such a huge foundation for something like boxing. Seems like boxers are like skipping rope, right? Doing sit-ups, push-ups, some body weight exercises, and then so much of their training seems like they call it road work. You're supposed to do a certain amount of road work every week. I think they kind of want a standard thing for a boxer is they want them to be able to run 2 miles in around 12 minutes, which is flying, which is hard. But like someone like Floyd Mayweather, I mean, that's what he would go out and just run. So it's interesting. I guess the sports are very different. In boxing, you're not getting tangled up nearly as much as you would in a grappling sport. But for wrestling, it's very common for when you were a high school wrestler. I'm sure your coach had you guys run often, right?
Yeah, we ran quite a bit. In my opinion, I felt like we ran too much. I think I had this thought when I was a wrestling athlete, and then my perspective changed a little bit when I was a wrestling coach. And I thought as a wrestling athlete, I don't know why we're running so much. And then as a coach, I realized, oh, I get it. You need to get all the kids out of the wrestling room for just 10 minutes to just
it's mayhem.
It is absolute chaos. And so I definitely understand the need for the coach to be like, go hit that run to the Roseville Fountains and back, and come back in 20 minutes and give me some peace and quiet for a little bit. We ran a lot from wrestling. And the other thing is with wrestling being so intensive and the wrestling room's always packed, and when people need to cut weight, sometimes wrestling or drilling wrestling is a great way to kind of kickstart that weight cut process. But other times, if someone's battling an injury, being in a completely depleted state, cutting weight and wrestling as a way to continue to lose weight may not be the safest thing if you have a tournament the next day or 2 days later. And so oftentimes wrestlers will use running as a way to, okay, I'm going to work on cutting weight, but I'm not necessarily going to get my neck cranked on further or get my knee twisted further. I can get in this physical activity, drop the weight a little bit, and hopefully be ready to go when competition shows up.
I wonder why swimming's not utilized a little bit more. Swimming is incredible, but that's a skill set too. I can't swim for shit.
Yeah. I kind of think that's what would make it so great for conditioning, is because we all kind of suck at swimming. We're so inefficient.
So our efficiency sucks. So therefore we'd get a great workout even if we could make it down and back a couple times.
Yeah. I'm curious about this, since we were just kind of talking about weight cutting. Well, a lot of jiu-jitsu guys and girls, they want to reach a certain weight class, right? Because maybe they're 190, but they feel strong. They feel like they're stronger when they're competing against people that are 170. But I'm just curious, what are your thoughts when you hear people talk about weight cutting when it comes to jiu-jitsu and jiu-jitsu competition?
90% of the time, my answer is just don't do it. Weight cutting does nothing to help improve your performance. It's just a negative variable that you have to overcome when you compete. And some people get really, really, really good at overcoming that negative variable, and other people not so much. When someone's competing for the first time, and I think you have given this or similar advice for people doing their first powerlifting meet, but don't worry about cutting weight in your first powerlifting meet. Don't worry about cutting weight in your first jiu-jitsu competition. It's just an unnecessary variable that you have to manage for your first competition. And I would go as far to say, don't cut weight at all unless you're competing for a huge bag or a major world title. because outside of that, it's not really going to do much for you. You're not making a whole bunch of money competing and then, sucking down weight and competing at 170. If you're 190, you're not going to make any more money if you win that division. All you're going to do is be going in a depleted state. And then unless
you're going to suck at what you're doing anyway.
Yeah, pretty much.
You're still new. It's going to take a while.
Exactly. Yeah.
So don't worry about trying to beat everybody up in the 170-pound weight class.
Yeah. And then the other thing would be if you're more experienced and you're competing for a major world title, that is weight cutting could be beneficial, not from a performance standpoint, but just a matchup standpoint. There may be people in a heavier weight class that like, it's going to be really, really tough if I'm matched up with this particular guy in the first round. Shoot, I may be fully hydrated, but fully hydrated or not, that guy's going to smoke me pretty bad. I may be more competitive in this lower weight class, so maybe there's something that I can do to cut weight to get down in that lower weight class to heighten my chances of being more competitive, for this competition.
Mm-hmm. And Nsima's too jacked. He can't even lose weight to get into the lower weight class. You just have to lose a bunch of muscle mass,
pretty much,
or get shorter or something.
Yeah, I really can't do that. But yeah, it really hasn't made much sense because most people, when I talk to them about their weight cut, like, where do you feel stronger? It's like, well, 190. Like, why are you cutting to 170? Because they're a little bit smaller. But do you feel strong at 170? No. So then why are you doing this stuff?
You're like, you're going to be a little bit smaller too.
Yeah.
They're a little weaker in that weight class. You're going to be a little weaker too.
It doesn't do anything to help, in my opinion. And I think because of how, just for how long weight cutting has been a part of all of these sports, it's been a part of boxing, been a part of MMA, been a part of wrestling. For jiu-jitsu athletes, it's just accepted, like, oh, I have to cut weight. And I think we can all agree, like, you don't necessarily have to. And there's a lot of things that you can do to cut weight if you need to, but it should be on an as-needed basis, not just as common practice for every single time you compete. And with guys that are competing, multiple times throughout the year, doing a lot of competitions back to back to back, every single time that you have to cut weight for the next competition, you're exponentially decreasing your performance. You should really only be like doing a major weight cut once or twice a year. If you're doing it every other weekend for 6 months straight, that's going to be pretty rough on you, bro.
Yeah. And it's funny that you see it in powerlifting, that you see people like wanting to cut weight, because powerlifting, the fastest way to get strong, everybody knows the fastest way to get strong is to actually gain weight.
Yeah.
I mean, with very minimal training and just gaining body weight, whatever kind of body weight it would be, you can gain a little bit of strength in some of the lifts. So it's always been real interesting to me. I'm like, this guy, he's doing his first contest, and in the next 12 weeks, he wants to lose like 12 pounds, or wants to try to lose 12 pounds just to get himself in line to lose 8 pounds the day before to do like a water cut. And you're like, man, that's a lot you're talking about 20 pounds. And you're like, oh yeah, but the contest is 3 months away. It's like, you're going to continue to lose weight as you're trying to lift more weight. This doesn't make any sense. In jiu-jitsu, I think something that would be really challenging would be if you started and you didn't have hardly any capacities. Like if you started and you didn't really have a lifting background, you found out that your conditioning's pretty poor, and maybe you have some body fat to lose. Like maybe having this extra weight on you is just like a goal. You just want to lose weight, look better, feel better. And so that would probably make it feel like you're really behind, and you go to class and you're getting all this different information. One guy's like, oh man, you should probably only come in like once a week because you're not really conditioned for this yet, and you just got your ass kicked the first couple classes. And you're like, yeah, that might be. And then somebody else tells you like, man, you just got to commit. You got to come in here 4 times a week. Hey, are you lifting? Are you doing like your cardio's not great? You're really bad at this. You're like, oh my, I'm so bad at everything. And then you probably go out and try to like conquer the world. You're like, all right, Settlage said assault bike. Andrew told me to work on my sweeps. And you got all these different things. You got these like a list of 25 things that you need to try to figure out. On top of that, get stronger and learn great techniques. So it's when somebody first gets in, they're probably like, oh my God, I just suck at everything. And maybe it makes people quit, or maybe it makes people just maybe not want to stick with it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I've seen a lot of that. I mean, it's been great that post 2020 and everything that happened during that time, there's been like a huge influx of new people coming to jiu-jitsu. In no-gi classes, no one wears a belt. And so at least for myself, I try to always ask like, how long have you been training, just to get an idea of, okay, do I need to dial things back or do I need to dial things up, depending on who I'm rolling with. And over the last couple of weeks, almost every single person has been like, oh, it's my first week. Like, I just started coming yesterday. This is my second class. Wow. And that's awesome. The sad part about that is that probably only 50% of those people actually stick around for a couple months. And I think it does have a lot to do with the enormous tidal wave of information and suggestions and everything else that they should be doing that people are telling them to do, that it can be almost a little discouraging for them to stick with it, because it may seem a little overwhelming to do all of those things. Like, oh, I gotta, okay, keep my arms and, elbows connected to my ribs. Oh, but I also have to work on my conditioning. Oh, I also need to stretch and all these other things. And so I would say for anyone listening that's interested in starting jiu-jitsu, or maybe you just started jiu-jitsu and you are feeling a little bit overwhelmed, is just to focus on like one controllable variable at a time, and then just give your best effort with everything else outside of that. So maybe that's like, hey, my conditioning really sucks. I'm going to work on that a little bit. So maybe all you're focusing on is just working up to being able to do all the sparring rounds. You don't have to win all the sparring rounds. You don't even need to perform well in any of the sparring rounds, but just actually do them. And so maybe one week you do 3 out of the 6 sparring rounds, and you say like, okay, my goal for this week, if I go to 3 classes this week, I'm going to do 3 sparring rounds in all of those classes. And then you go the next week and say, okay, one day I'm going to try to do 4 in a row without taking a break. If I want to take the last 2 off, I can, but I'm just going to try to get to 4 in a row and slowly build up that capacity. And then you can look at the next variable. Okay, I'm really tight. I can't do many of these guard positions. I don't know how these people are being able to turn upside down and move their legs this way. And I feel like my back is going to explode every time I'm on bottom position. So maybe I should just take one step at a time. I'm going to do 10 minutes. I'm going to find a smooth panther mobility routine to do before jiu-jitsu. And I go 3 times a week, which means I'm going to do 3 smooth panther routines this week. And then the next week, maybe I do it on a day I don't go to jiu-jitsu. So find one variable, break it down to the smallest manageable step that you can take, and go step by step, one at a time. Gradum ferociter, is that the quote?
Yeah, step by step ferociously.
Yeah, step by step ferociously. You take that with each variable. Over time, you're going to get crazy good. You're going to get in crazy good shape. You might not be a world champ, but you'll make an insane amount of progress, and you'll be surprised at how quickly that cascade of disciplines tends to pay off and how much you can handle other things on top of that. If you were only doing 3 jiu-jitsu classes a week and you never did any more than just 3 a week, but you focus on rolling all of those training rounds. Okay, now you're doing 3 times 6, 18 sparring sessions a week. I had to think pretty hard on that one. But you're doing 18 sparring sessions a week. And then you're like, man, I'm feeling pretty good. I'm recovering well. My conditioning is going great. I actually feel like I can add a 4th day of physical activity. Maybe I'll just go to the gym and start building on top of that foundation. And over time, you'll have a huge foundation. And like the OG Louis Simmons says, a pyramid is only as tall as its base. So you build up a huge foundation, you're going to have a higher peak that you can achieve.
I want you guys to imagine that you're wearing a cast on your hand and you're going through your whole day with this cast hand. Well, because your fingers don't move, your hand will start to become stiff, weak, and that'll work its way up your arm. That's the same thing that happens when you wear these damn shoes, okay? I'm sorry to curse, but it's frustrating because these shoes that have a narrow toe box, although they look nice and they're Nikes, narrow toe box so your toes can't move. They're not flat, so your foot is in this weird thing and it's not getting stronger. And they're not flexible, so they don't move and your foot just moves like this all day, which means your feet are getting weaker. That's why we partner with Vivo barefoot shoes. They have a bunch of shoes for the gym and casual shoes, but the thing about these shoes is that they are wide, they are flat, and they are flexible. So your foot can do what it needs to do and it can get stronger over time. That's gonna allow you to be a better, stronger athlete. Andrew, how can they get them?
Yes, that's over at vivobarefoot.com/powerproject. When you guys get there, you'll see a code across the top. Make sure you use that code for 15% off your entire order. Again, vivobarefoot.com/powerproject. Links in the description as well as the podcast show notes.
Throw these away.
Oh my God. Dude, watch the camera.
Actually, Andrew, I have a question for you, man. How long have you been rolling now?
So since November, I don't do math the way that Josh just did very fast.
8
so
months.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
8 months. Do you feel that things have like started to really click? And I'm curious about this because you had no prior grappling experience.
No, none. Click in what aspect?
Just like Jiu-Jitsu makes a bit more sense when you watch it.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it absolutely
and you can
has.
actually do it.
Yeah, like even when you and I are talking about a certain, like we've been talking about collar sleeve, I can now see that in your previous roles, and then like kind of be like, hey, at this timestamp you did that, and you're like, oh, I did, like so stuff like that is starting to make sense. During roles, it's no longer like, oh, what was that one thing? Like, oh, too late. It's sort of like, oh, I go this way instead of thinking I'm supposed to go that way. Or is this the opportunity where I can turtle and then roll out of this position? It's no longer that. It's like I went for it and I got it. Cool. I got out of the bad spot. So yeah, I guess it is clicking. Of course, when I go against like upper belts and people that are just better than me, it clicks for them a little bit faster. Like they see it before I see it, or they react to it before I can. But at least I'm going like the right direction. Whereas before it was like, I'm going to go this way, see what happens. Now it's like, well, okay, that was dumb. Like, and I know it too, like, cause I still will make mistakes, but I'll be like, I know I did that one wrong. Like that's on me, not taking anything away from anybody else, but I know when I make a mistake now.
How did your frequency build up until this point at 8 months? Where did you start and where is it now?
I want to say initially it was like 2 times a week. And then, I still did, 3 times or more of like, of lifting in the gym. And then eventually went to 3, and then I couldn't keep up with the lifting cause I started like looking like a zombie when I'd get here. Cause it was just a little bit, well, it was a lot too much for me. It wasn't just a little bit. And little by little, dude, like it was like lifting here, jiu-jitsu here, and then it kind of just like whoop, it went the opposite way really fast. Pre-comp, I switched it from 3 days a week to 4 days a week with like a lifting session just on Saturday. And then now I kind of kept the 4 days a week, and the last 2 weeks have been at least 5 days plus like an extra something on Saturday. So it progressed pretty fast to where my body can handle it. Now, granted, like it's, I don't even know what today is, but I'm pretty tired. I am pretty beat up from the last week to this week. I keep saying, oh, I'm going to get some rest. I'm going to get some sleep. And I look up and I'm like, oh, cool. It's past 10 again. And I'm going to wake up pretty early. The Morpheus app is telling me that, I'm not fully recovered, but it's like, hey, we got to go train, that's almost, it's basically like a non-negotiable at this point, so it feels that good for me, to be tired, but still be able to go and learn and do pretty good for my level. So yeah, it's been, my body's acclimating pretty good right now at this pace.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So 8 months to get to 5 days a week. And of those 5 days, 3 are open mat plus an extra class.
Dang.
So, yeah. And then the other 2 have went from just like kind of like whatever open mat to like actual positional and situationals, which have been, to me, they're almost like a burnout set, because like you can kind of go all out and not get hurt because you're already in the position. You can work really hard, get a ton of work in, but you're not like doing takedowns. You're not really getting hurt. You're not going against a spazzy white belt or something. Like you're just getting solid, efficient work in that situational. And then it's like, boop, 3 minutes is over. Next partner, and you just keep going and going. So that's been huge.
That's freaking awesome, man.
Yeah.
I love that you mentioned positional sparring. After listening to the Giancarlo episode.
Oh yeah,
Giancarlo Bodoni, 88 kg 80cc champ from 2022. He had talked a lot about positional sparring, and it is like exactly what you said, like a burnout set. Like depending on who your partner is and how you guys stack up skill wise, you could use positional sparring as a way to like just drill the same technique over and over and over and get really good at that. Or you could use it as, okay, this is like a 2-minute round or a 3-minute round, and we're going to, dogfight for this one position and then reset and hit it again, reset and hit it again. So that's awesome that you've built up that work capacity and that you're able to handle all the positional sparring, all the open mats, all the live training. That's freaking great.
Yeah. And that's the other thing too. So like when I would go to open mat, let's say I get 2 rounds in, 2 matches or whatever, 2 live rolls in, and I'd have to take 1 round off just to like calm down, and then I can go again. And then depending how I felt after that, I might go again. Now I've made it like a point to just try not to take any rounds off, period. and then just keep going from there. Like to the point where it's like, fuck, okay, I'm pretty tired. Class is about to start. Then, you know, the timer will get reset and somebody will be like, hey, I got one more. Like I said, I wasn't going to take any rounds off. And so like I go again. And so like that's been like huge, because when I first started, I just remember like, dude, I think I'm going to throw up. Like this is tough. Like, this is really hard. To now, I'm not saying that like I'm getting the best of anybody, but I'm not saying I can't because I'm tired. I might say I can't because, you know, maybe I do feel banged up or whatever it may be, but I'm not allowing myself to say no because I'm gassed out. You know, I'm like, no, let's just keep working. I'll get into a position where I can take a breath and then I'll keep working, but I'm not going to just be like, no, I can't, you know, like that's been like really nice.
That is so awesome. Do you remember what that was like for you, Nsima, feeling like the empowerment of knowing like, I'm not going to get tired doing 6 rounds. I may like get smoked really bad for 6 rounds, but I'm at least not going to get tired or get punked because I'm out of breath.
Yeah, man. Yeah, no, what Andrew's feeling right now, I don't necessarily like, I can't remember that, but you know, when you get things handled as far as like, you understand it well enough where you don't feel like a fish out of water. You're not like constantly helpless. You know what I mean? Because there's a lot of times in the beginning where you literally feel helpless because you have no tools to deal with what somebody's doing. Yeah, it just takes a while. It takes a while to get there.
Yeah.
I think it's important that people have the ability to kind of zoom out from whatever it is that they're working on that's new, because if you can zoom out and kind of think, get a little drone shot of what it is that you're doing, you can say, yeah, I'm not really that good at this, but you're not really that good at this for right now. You know, what will 6 months look like? What will 8 months look like? Even if you just do something once a week. I think Nsima sent us a message a while back. There was a guy, I'm sure there's many stories like this, but I think the guy got his black belt in Jiu Jitsu and he was only able to go once a week. And he just went once a week forever. I don't know how long it took him to get there, but he just went one time per week. I think Smokey, is going to Jiu Jitsu right now, like once a week. So it's like whatever you can manage, but maybe for one person, maybe once a week, then allows them to build some conditioning and kind of work on some other things. Or maybe even for you, Andrew, you find like, oh, if I just fucking relax and take a day off. You know, if I commit to 4 times a week, 3/4 times a week, and then getting better sleep, I'm not saying that I know for sure that that'll make you better, but it might.
Yeah.
It's hard to have the discipline sometimes on those days off to still get yourself to bed at the right time and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I do, trust me, you were in the back of my head this morning, because I woke up pretty damn early. I woke up at like 3:30 because I had to go to the bathroom. But it was one of those things where like I got up and then I looked at the clock and I'm like, like, do I just stay up or do I go to the bathroom and try to like sleep for like, you know, whatever, half an hour? And I'm like, dude, I'm really tired. So, I went back to sleep. And then alarm went off. I snoozed. I turned it off, and then I closed my eyes, and I woke up like 45 minutes later. So now it's like, shit. Like, I'm missing open mat right now. I'm like, okay, part of being a champion is knowing when to say no.
Yeah.
And I'm like, nah, fuck that, let's go. And so I ended up going, and I had a really good day. But, still, I know that like my body is telling me like, you need to calm down. But when things start clicking, like Nsima showing me some collar sleeve guard stuff that I'm really pumped about, because I'm able to kind of suppress some dudes they normally would just walk right through my guard. And if I can put up at least a challenge for them to be like, oh, I have to actually try now, like that feels really good. So I don't want to lose connection with that. But I know that like, over the weekend, I'm going to be doing some other stuff outside of the mats that I'll probably feel rejuvenated come Monday and just want to get in there like a bat out of hell.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Let me ask you something, Josh. I know that you work with a lot of like super driven athletes. And one thing when you work with those types of individuals is they want to push through discomfort. And there's an importance to pushing through discomfort. But there's sometimes, and I've seen this happen to a lot of guys that we know, you keep pushing that you like, there's just this thing that you haven't been dealing with because you thought your knee was okay, and then boom, it rips. There's this thing in your back that you just haven't been dealing with, but you just continue training to, and now you have a hernia. Like, how do you help athletes to consider and think about their long-term goals, even though they need to keep working fucking hard in the process?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's a huge problem with jiu-jitsu as a whole, mainly because I think jiu-jitsu is new enough to where it's getting really popular and you have all these driven people that want to compete and do really well, but it's not established enough like the NFL or like the NBA where there's so much research to show like, hey, playing all these games means that you need to take some time off and rest. You know, getting slammed by a 260-pound guy on the football field means you need to recover. Jiu-jitsu doesn't really have that much evidence or data yet to like show these athletes like you got to take a chill pill every once in a while and focus. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
people talking about going every day. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So one thing that I try to teach a lot of the athletes that I work with is the VIP method, which is something that I'm sure someone else has come up with something similar, so I can't say it's mine unless I reference it twice. Then
it's yours.
It's your boys.
You said it on wax, so it counts.
That's right. Yeah, it's on wax. So the VIP method just stands for vision, intention, and purpose. And so vision is basically like setting a goal, but taking it a step further. Everybody has the same goal. When you competed in your last tournament, everybody had the same goal of winning the tournament. So having a goal on its own isn't enough. You have to have a more clear and refined vision on what you actually want to do, what your game plan looks like, how you're going to show up to the competition, what are the things you need to work on to put you in the best position to win and fulfill that vision. Everybody kind of understands that. We all watch these motivational videos and get fired up. What people tend to miss is understanding their intention and the purpose. And so if you can clearly identify the intentions that you have for each training session, that will help keep you aligned in some of those practices. Are going to help you stay in the sport longer, as well as help you make greater progress over time. So for one athlete, say they've been ignoring a particular knee injury for a long time. Their knee hasn't completely blown apart, but they've gotten it popped multiple times in competition over the last couple of years, and they just haven't really done anything about it yet. Yeah. I'll ask them what their vision is, and they say like, I want to be an ADCC champ, or even if it's a white belt, saying like, I just want to win my first competition. I've competed 3 times, and I just want to win a competition. That's great. All right, let's focus on your vision. Now let's talk about intentions. What are the intentions? And this is kind of where I would come in and help them clearly identify the intentions of each training session. This training session here, the intention is to improve your skills, not roll hard. If you're rolling hard, you're kind of, for this one session, you're kind of taken away from the benefit of improving your skills. The intention for this session is to simulate competition. So you need to be ready just like you would be for a competition. That means your sleep needs to be on point. Your hydration needs to be on point. You need to show up to the gym early and get a really good warm up. Don't just roll in off the street. You wouldn't do that at a tournament, so don't do it for your sparring sessions. So make sure that your intentions are in line for each session. And that's kind of where I come in to help them understand, like, look, if your goal or your vision is to win this competition, you have to be in good enough shape to actually get there. So we need to reorganize your intentions for some of these training sessions. And then the last part, P, would be purpose. I don't think every athlete necessarily needs to be a PhD in sport physiology or a sports psychologist, but they should have some general understanding of the purpose that all of the training sessions and all the things that they're doing do to contribute to their overall performance. I forget his name, but the super smart guy that used to write for Elite FTS.
James Smith.
James Smith. He wrote The Thinker. That's right. He wrote an article basically saying like we should just get rid of all strength coaches. Like there's no point in having a strength coach. And the main intent of that article, and correct me if I'm wrong, was basically to have a coach that kind of knows everything and is adequate in the knowledge of not just strength and conditioning, but also their performance on the field. Not just strength and conditioning and mobility and flexibility, but also their athletes' performances on the mat. And I think to kind of turn that into, or put that on the athlete themselves should have a base understanding of, okay, why am I doing conditioning this way on the bike? Oh yeah, it's because I messed my knee up and I can't run on it right now. Why does that keep happening? Oh, because I hardly sleep. Okay, let me make sure I understand the purpose of sleeping and doing these knee exercises to get my knee on point. Why are we doing, I'm not a super explosive jiu-jitsu player, but why am I doing explosive work? Oh, well, every time someone creates a scramble, I lose the scramble and I lose matches. Okay, this is the purpose of why we're doing this. So if you work through the VIP method, understand your vision, you have clear intentions for each training session. Then you also understand the purpose that those training sessions have as far as your overall development, I think that'll help a lot of athletes who kind of get stuck in that cycle of, I just want to go hard all the time, because if I'm not going hard, then I must not be working hard enough, and I'm going to fail because I'm not, feeling like I just died at the end of every training session.
Yeah, it's tough. I think people, they want to feel like they're working hard, so when someone thinks of something like, oh, I'm going to add this, they don't ever think about subtraction, but you have to probably subtract somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, you just have to. If you're going to do more jiu-jitsu classes, you need more food. You need more sleep. Like, you just need, I'm just going to lose weight, dwindle down to nothing, and just not have energy. It's like, over time, it's maybe not going to work out great. I do agree you do need to push, and I do agree that, like, there is something to be said about, like, running on fumes every once in a while, and kind of just being able to get yourself through that from, like, a mental standpoint. Maybe you teach yourself you can push a lot harder than you ever thought, and that's cool. That's a really good thing to know. But once you kind of get past that, probably might be a good idea to dial something back somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you manage it for yourself? Because you're, I know you like to get up really early, but you don't wake up super early every single day, right? It's weekends a little different. You got different protocols for different days, right?
Yep. Yeah, I used to wake up super early between 2 and 3 a.m. all throughout college. It was just 7 days a week. Didn't matter what was going on. Didn't matter what time I went to bed. That's just when I'm waking up. That's when roll call happens. And that worked well while I was in college because of just how crazy everything was, balancing all these different jobs, going to school full time, all this stuff. But now that I'm past that, I recognized probably 6 to 12 months ago that I'm not really in that stage of life anymore. I'm thankfully in a position where I have full control over my schedule. I have full control almost over everything that I want to do. I don't have
I could wake up at 7.
I could wake up at 7 if I wanted to.
If the day's halfway over, sure. Yeah, why not?
Your body's like, nah, we can't wake up.
Yeah, wake up at 7 and waste half the day. Like, come on, man. But I just realized, like, okay, if I really want to maximize my potential as a human being in every aspect, whether that's mentally, spiritually, emotionally, physically, then I need to be taking care of myself a little bit better. And I'm not a full-time college student working 3 different jobs anymore. So I don't really need to get up between 2 and 3 a.m. 7 days a week. I love lifting early in the morning. I love training early in the morning. So on the days that I train, I will get up at 2:15 or 2:30. And then I push because I've done that, I know, like, okay, I'm going to train and I'm going to push myself really, really hard. And this kind of like is the mental game that I play with myself. If I push myself hard enough in the gym and jiu-jitsu, then I know that the best thing for me is going to get 8 to 9 hours of sleep the following night. And I think the mistake I made when I was in college was that I didn't feel like I was ever pushing myself hard enough. I could have always been doing more. So I didn't need as much recovery because I felt like I wasn't pushing myself as hard.
But maybe you couldn't, right?
Exactly.
Because you weren't recovered.
Yeah. It's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Could I not push myself because I was sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night, 365 days out of the year? Or could I not push myself because I was sleeping 4 to 5 hours a night, 365 days out of the year?
How did you break that mindset then? Or that thought?
I talked with my therapist a lot.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. He was a big help on that.
What did he say?
Yeah. He's like, dude, you're jacked.
Yeah.
You're already there, bro.
And when did you start therapy or getting therapy?
I initially started when I was in elementary school.
Oh, wow.
And then had a lot of therapy sessions in middle school. Kind of took a break last half of high school and then really got back into it probably a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago.
Okay.
But what I talked to him about, and what's great of having that particular therapist, is that he had known me as a kid. He'd worked with my parents for years. And so he had basically said, like, you don't have to worry about being successful. Like, look at everything that you have in your life right now, everything that you've experienced up until this point. You had mentioned this before with John Cena. To be successful, you must first be a success. And he basically told me the same thing. Like, you don't need to worry about being successful. Like, trust me, dog, you'll be just fine. You will be successful. You'll be able to achieve the things that you want to achieve. But if you keep this way of living up, you're probably not going to be prepared for those things when they come. They may happen much later than you would like, or you may ruin a lot of other things in your life along the way. So maybe if there's 10 important things in your life, you may have crushed it in one domain running this way, but the other 9 are probably going to get torn up pretty bad. You could achieve, all 10 of those things, maybe at different points in your life, but you're at least going to be able to have all 10 instead of burning yourself into the ground and only achieving one right away.
So you've gotten your labs done, whether it's 6 months ago or a year ago, and you want to know where things are at, but you don't want to get a full panel again. That's why I've partnered with Merrick Health, owned by Derek from More Plates, More Dates, and we have something called the Checkup Panel. This is an affordable panel with 55 different labs that'll allow you to see all those different biomarkers, and you can get this channel every month or every 2 months, whatever frequency you like, but it'll give you all the specific labs that you want to know so that you can make sure that you're moving in the right direction for your specific hormones. Andrew, how can they get their hands on it?
Yes, that's over at merrickhealth.com/powerproject. And at checkout, enter promo code POWERPROJECT to save 10% off the Power Project panel, the checkup panel, or any individual lab that you select. Again, that's at merrickhealth.com/powerproject, promo code POWERPROJECT at checkout, links in the description, as well as the podcast show notes. You have a good amount of guys at this point now that you're coaching and training, and a good amount of those guys are winning tournaments and doing really well, which is exciting to see.
Yes, sir.
So how do you handle like some of that comp training? Like, do you break it down in phases and like weeks and that sort of thing? Like, how does that run?
Yeah, that's something that I talk a lot about on my website, The Strength Matrix. Basically, at least from my perspective, I think there's a huge issue in the jiu-jitsu community that it's great that all these athletes are competing. It's great that they're training really hard, but there's a lot of misinformation and confusion around how to train optimally to be in the best position to actually win. And it doesn't mean that we need to do all these super fancy, complicated things to our training, but just understanding this is how we prepare a training camp. Training camp is not about getting in shape for competition. You need to be in shape when training camp starts. So plan out your year of knowing that, okay, it's like Christmas time. I'm in pretty out of shape. I haven't been training jiu-jitsu as often, but I want to compete in June. I should probably work up to, from January to March, getting in shape. So that way when training camp starts, I feel freaking awesome. And I could spend all 8 to 12 weeks in training camp, training hard, recovering even harder, and be in a really good spot to win that competition in June. And so I work with a lot of athletes, just helping them better understand how they can structure their training so that way they can get better results in competition. And a lot of times you could really become an amazing athlete if you just dialed in some, what we, the four of us, feel like are simple things like dial in your sleep, dial in your nutrition, understand that you can't go hard in the paint 7 days out of the week and expect to sustain that over a long period of time. So maybe at the beginning of training camp, you only go hard, like really, really hard comp simulation training sessions twice a week, and you separate those by about 48 to 72 hours. As you get closer and closer to competition, maybe you do that three to four times a week. But if you do that, then we also need to make sure everything else we do has an equal balance. So we dial back how intense we're going in the gym, because it's not about how much you do, it's about what you do and can recover from that actually leads to progress. And so that's basically what I've been working on a lot over the last year and a half, is educating these jiu-jitsu athletes to look at their year of competition a little bit differently, instead of just trying to compete every single weekend or every other weekend for as long as you want to. Actually have some forethought into, okay, this competition is a warm-up comp, this competition is a qualifier, so this, we kind of do need to be peaked for this competition. This competition over here, it's not really a warm-up competition. There probably will be some tough guys in those brackets, but the main goal is the World Championships in June, or the main goal is ADCC trials in whatever month you're competing in, since ADCC trials tend to bounce around. So yeah, that's what we've been working on, helping them better structure their training, have a better idea of how they can establish a solid preseason, a comp season, an off season, and go from there.
How do you teach or communicate kind of how to lift? If someone's totally new to lifting, they've been doing jiu-jitsu for a little bit and they want to strength train and they hire you, how do you, is it, you send pictures, videos, how do you get the point across on kind of how to do some of the exercises and stuff?
I just point them to you. I just link a lot, honestly.
Yeah, all the YouTube links. There you go.
Yeah. So
here's how you squat.
Yep. Yeah. So I've filmed a lot of tutorials myself now and put them on my website. But when I first got started, I would just honestly point them all back to you. So everything about in a squat, we open up our taint and, go from there. When, we're benching, we reach our chest towards the bar and pinch our back and things like that. And so over time, I've collected a lot of those cues that I learned from you, learned from other people like Matt Wenning, Ed Cohn, Stan Efferding. We're on first name basis now, so it'd be like that. But normally I have 8 exercises that I try to have all grappling athletes start with, or at least variations of those exercises. So that will be a Zercher box squat, that'll be a sumo deadlift, that'll be a floor press, a Z press. Those are in the bent over row. Those are the barbell exercises.
But wait, before you go to the other exercises, why do you choose the cheater deadlift? I mean, we have to ask that question. I love it, but why?
You and me know, bro. It's you can deadlift way more if you do it that way. That's the only reason why. No, I'm just kidding. I think the conventional deadlift is great. I think the trap bar deadlift is great, but there aren't very many positions in jiu-jitsu where your feet are going to be that close together all the time. A lot of times your feet are outside your hips or they're staggered in some way. You don't necessarily need to do like a whole bunch of crazy staggered deadlifts and things like that, but at least testing your top end strength with your feet spread apart, I think is a great idea and a good indicator of how strong you're getting in some of those positions that you may find yourself in on the mat. Nice. The other thing too is that the sumo deadlift, when you're doing it correctly, tends to put a lot less strain on the lower back than other forms of deadlifting. The trap bar deadlift does that too, but again, your feet are together, so you have a give and take there. The other thing that I love about the sumo deadlift is that it's a huge mobility test. If you really struggle on the sumo deadlift, that's an easy way for us to look at your mobility in your hips and see like you can't really open up your taint that far. You can't really externally rotate your hips that far. So maybe we should work on this. If you're doing only trap bar deadlifts or only conventional deadlifts, the mobility requirement really isn't there. And that may be something that we miss when addressing, the current mobility of an athlete.
And what were some of the other exercises you were going to talk about?
The bodyweight exercises we use are the pull-up, the dip, and the Nordic curl, which basically kind of covers those main movements, some sort of push, some sort of pull, and then the Nordic curl is like bodyweight strength with your lower body. The Nordic curl is super tough. I mean, we all know how hard it can be, so we often use variations of Nordic curls or find a good variation that works with them. We just filmed an amazing Nordic curl tutorial couple weeks ago, which guys you can check out on Nsima's YouTube channel. So that may look like a Nordic curl, a partial range of motion Nordic curl, or a band assisted. Yeah, there we go. A band assisted Nordic curl, like what Nsima's doing right here. And then with pull-ups and dips, we often use that as an indicator to help with body weight strength. So if a jiu-jitsu athlete can do, I think every jiu-jitsu athlete, regardless of what weight class they are, as a male athlete, should be able to do 10 pull-ups. If you can't do 10 pull-ups as a male jiu-jitsu athlete, that's a problem.
Why are you shaming them, Joe?
Hey, I'm just saying, bro, they got to get their pull-up game up.
Work on it.
Yeah, exactly. So at a minimum, male jiu-jitsu athletes should be able to do 10 pull-ups, 10 dips, regardless of what weight class. If you're able to do more than 20 pull-ups, you probably don't really need to work on them as much anymore. I'm not sure how much doing 20 to 25 pull-ups is going to make you a better jiu-jitsu athlete, but at least you've developed a lot of strength in that movement. You have the same thing for dips. If you can do 10 dips, that's a great start. Over 30, if you're doing a lot more than 30 dips, probably don't need to keep working on dips once you can do more than 30 in a single set. And so we use those main movements as indicators of, okay, how prepared and how physically fit is this athlete? And then we build the rest of their training off of that. So maybe they really struggle with something like a Z press. Their trunk strength and their hamstring mobility is awful, and they could hardly do a barbell Z press. All right, let's do a dumbbell Z press, have them work into regularly doing barbell Z presses, kind of take that same approach with all the other exercises and go from there.
That's a tough exercise. That's where you're sitting down on your butt and you're trying to press the weight up overhead, right?
Yeah, it's freaking hard. It's brutal.
How was it Biggs University?
Oh,
dude,
yeah.
What was that like?
That was freaking sick. So I went to Biggs University at Stan Efferding's house in March, which was awesome. I'd met Stan several times just through you guys, but at this point, or going into it, I don't think he like really remembered me. He's just like, "What's up, Biggs?" So he definitely didn't know who I was.
He calls us all Biggs. That's okay.
Okay. But yeah, he hosted a seminar at his house. Him and Ben Pollock, who's also been on the podcast a couple times. And it was awesome. It was like everything that I would have wanted, which was like a deep dive into how to get stronger, how to build more muscle, deep dive in nutrition. They even talked about PEDs there, which was pretty interesting. And so it was just a really awesome event, and something that I felt very blessed to be able to learn from Stan.
Is it like a Tupperware party type thing? Like they tell you about steroids and then they open up a chest and they're like, oh, here we got Dianabol, we got testosterone.
It was a big meathead
samples, so that way you're just hooked. You got to get more.
Yeah. And Josh, you don't have to pay for any of these if you sell some to Andrew.
I don't know what you're talking about with that. I will not disclose.
But I did sign up under you, so we're good to go.
All right. I'll get my commission hopefully this week.
It's not a pyramid.
But yeah, that event was freaking awesome. And I felt like for me, going out and learning from some of the best guys in the world on these subjects, like Stan Efferding and Ben Pollock, was really beneficial for me, and it was pretty dope.
They know a lot about, Stan especially has worked with a lot of athletes. I don't know if people know that, but he's worked with sprinters over the years. He works with Bones Jones. It doesn't get any higher up the totem pole than that, So he's worked with a lot of athletes outside of just powerlifting.
That was actually super fascinating, because at the time that the event was held, it was, I think, 2 or 3 weeks before Bones fought Cyril Gahn. And so I had a lot of questions about like what he was doing with John and all that stuff. And it was so fascinating. Like when you're working with someone who is already the best ever, it's hard most people don't think that someone like that could get any better. And it takes someone like Stan, who's that skilled and has that much experience and that much knowledge and how the body works, but also how to communicate with a high caliber athlete like John Jones and help them get a little bit better. I think helping someone go from, level 0 to level 5 is awesome. That's great, getting people started, but having enough knowledge and experience to take someone from level 95 to 100 is a whole different ballgame. And that was pretty impressive.
It's hard to get athletes confidence. It's hard to get, them to really trust in what you're saying, because they're probably going to be like, I'm going to sprint on this treadmill, or I'm going to, do this. Like, no, that's not what I used to do. I got along great, without doing any of this. I'm going to try that and get hurt? I don't think so. Yeah. So it's like, takes a long time to be able to build up that trust with athletes, I think.
He had talked about that a lot, about how as he's worked with a lot of high level guys, that is a kind of a common conversation he's had. Like they'll think like, you're telling me to walk 10 minutes? Like, I don't think you know, like I run, 2-3 miles, at a time, or 2-3 miles at a time, no problem. So why do I need to walk for 10 minutes? Is this really going to help? And what's great about Stan and his book, The Vertical Diet, is that he just has all the resources and all the evidence and all the data to back it up. I don't necessarily think that every single coach or every single athlete needs to only do stuff that's scientifically proven, because I think a lot of times, a lot of the studies and stuff are a little outdated. Things that you had been doing for years that led to a lot of your success are just now coming out to be like, hey, you should probably try that. So if you only work on the current data that's available today, you might be behind a little bit. But at least when you're building rapport with an athlete and helping them begin to trust you in the things that you're prescribing for them, having as much of a basis of information that Stan has and a bunch of resources to be able to back it up, I think definitely helps.
So what's, you have a huge knowledge base and you have a lot, you have a really good track record. So the proof is in the pudding, but you're still learning. So what's pushing you to continue to keep learning and, reaching? Because like, I know it wasn't free, it was expensive to go out there to hang out with Stan Efferding. What's motivating and driving you to still continue to learn today?
I still feel like I'm at level 20 or like level 15. If there's 100 levels, I still feel like I'm close to the bottom, and I want to be, work my way up as high as possible. I think working here for as long as I did was probably the biggest wake up call for that. I'm not saying that when I first started working here, I thought I knew everything, but I thought I knew way more than what I actually did. And then every single week you have new people coming in to do the podcast, new people coming in, even if they don't do the podcast, just to lift. And they may not be some big name person, but the way they lift and the way they move, the way they explain things, just watching some person come in that I've never met before, they don't have a huge Instagram following, but the way they described squatting to somebody completely blew my mind and made me realize like, oh, I have a lot to learn. I have a long way to go. And I'd mentioned this earlier that, I read Dune earlier this year. In that book, it's kind of a tangent, but in that book, there's like a huge theme of expanding knowledge and expanding the capacity of your brain. Because in that book, they outlawed all computers. And so if you have no computers, you just have to learn as much as possible. And reading that book, I was thinking like, that's actually pretty dope. Like, what if we didn't have any computers and we were just all forced to learn and acquire as much information as possible? And not just acquire it so that way we can repeat it, but fully understand it, because we don't have a computer to confirm our thoughts on certain things, or the internet to like, oh, well, I think this might be a good idea, but I don't really know. But I'll just see what Mark says. I'll just see what Nsima says. What did Andrew say? Like, good enough for Andrew, good enough for me. So that's kind of like what's been pushing me a lot to try to learn all of these things, is just, I feel like I'm way back at level 20 and I'm trying to get to level 100 and just gobble up as much information as I can.
I think when we're young, it's easy to be a follower. It's easy to like, oh, Louis Simmons. That sounds good. I'm going to try it. And you try it and it works. And so you follow that, and then you talk to other people about it and you communicate with them and you try different methods, and it's easy just to follow. But I think the older that you get, you're like, I still need to be a student. I still need to learn. I can't just foolishly follow people.
Yeah.
I need to say, oh, that seems like a pretty good idea. Let me play around with that for a minute, or let me research it a little bit more and then see how it works. And then also not say anything for a while. Let me just kind of like mess with this for like 3 months or a year. Oh, okay, it works really well. And then it worked well for a bunch of other people. Now maybe I'll share it out.
Yeah. To be honest, Mark, you put me on game to like a lot of stuff way earlier than when it became popular. And I was pretty surprised, like, when I first got to know you, your track record of like, hey, you should think about that. And I thought, like, this thing taping my mouth, like, that's weird, bro. I don't know. I don't really know about that. And sure enough, 3 to 6 months later, nasal breathing, this is like the best way you could, be breathing and all this stuff. And you remind me a lot of Tim Ferriss. Tim Ferriss has a pretty well-known track record.
Jack, though, right?
Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. Big time. But Tim Ferriss has a great track record of being like catching the wave of something way before it really crashes to the rest of the community. And I'd heard him say a quote that said, and I don't remember where he got this from, but he had basically said that the future is here. It's just not available to everybody yet. And I think for Mark, you're doing an amazing job of bringing the future to everybody else through the podcast. And it's definitely helped me just learning from you and the different videos you send me. And every video that comes in, like some of the go-to stuff or some of the landmine stuff you sent me way back then, I thought like, that is really freaking weird. I don't understand this spinal engine thing. But then 3 to 6 months later, they come on the podcast and like, boom, it clicks. And I think like, I have to start using some of these exercises with my athletes, or I have to try these things for myself and then make progress from there.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Got anything else, Andrew?
No, I guess that's it. That's just, I mean, again, the progression from intern to being, who we are today is just, it's always just one of the coolest things. And I get to brag about like seeing it kind of all happen basically in front of our eyes to like where you are now. It's just, like I said, dude, you're one of the coolest people I've ever known. And I'm just like proud of everything you've ever done. And I want to make sure I get that on air, because I think I do it enough, but I just want to make sure that you knew it again, that I am proud of you. And I'm just grateful that you are one of my best friends, man.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I feel like so blessed to know all three of you guys. And I think like anytime I feel, anytime I feel like discouraged or begin to doubt like where the trajectory of my life is going, I think like, dang, like I met Nsima and then he got me connected here with Mark. And then I met Mark, and then I met Andrew, and then Andrew and I started working on these projects together. And then Nsima helped me with this thing. And then Mark put me on game to this. And I think like so much of everything that I'm doing today has been a huge blessing, largely in part because of the relationship I have with you guys. So thank you very much for that.
I think it's really cool what you're mentioning a little bit off air. We talked about it briefly here, but I want to make sure we talk about it a little bit more. You're trying to put a system in place to be able to help people that are grapplers, athletes. I'm sure you'll probably get into other athletes, but mainly grapplers for now, I guess. where they do have a good understanding of this longer term plan, where they do have a good understanding of how to incorporate strength training, because it does seem to be massively important, not just for jiu-jitsu or grappling, but also just for people's health in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm currently working on a course right now. I'm not sure when this episode will air, but probably come out within a month after this episode airs. But the course is basically taking all the information about training and all the information about not just like the nuts and bolts of strength and conditioning of how to squat and how to, how long you should be doing conditioning for, but really thinking and taking that drone shot view that you mentioned, taking a step back and looking at training as a whole. Okay, how does training fit into this entire year for my jiu-jitsu career? And Nsima just competed at the biggest competition of his life recently. And I know Nsima well enough to know that he didn't just think like, put it on the calendar and I'll just show up. There was a lot of thought and a lot of intention that went into all of those training sessions. There was a lot of thinking that went involved of like, okay, how does this competition, how does all the stuff I'm doing leading up to this big competition, how do these things all work together so that way I can be in the best possible position to perform your absolute best, which I thought was freaking awesome. And so this course is going to focus on a lot of those things. There's 4 steps and there's kind of 4 things that you have to work through. First one would be to clarify your vision. Look at your kind of like the VIP method, which I talked about earlier. Look at your vision, intention, and purpose. Then the next thing would be to select the right training program, which is basically just making sure that the stuff you do in the gym is going to contribute to the goals that you have. And then the third step would be to optimize your training and recovery. There's a lot in that step that a lot of jiu-jitsu athletes just completely miss. They think that it's good enough just to do the work on the mat or in the gym, and that's going to get them to the dance to be the best in the world. And that's not the case. You can do that stuff and make progress for sure, but you really need to optimize every single aspect of that if you want to make the greatest amount of progress possible and be the best athlete you can be. And then the fourth step would be to just compete or test yourself, assess your performance, and then repeat the process over again. And if you run through that 4-step process over and over and over, if you start as a white belt, by the time you get to a black belt, you'll be so dialed in and you'll be so on point with understanding how your body feels when you compete, what you need as an individual athlete to feel and perform your best, that you'll really surprise yourself with how well you can perform and the peaks of performance that you could reach.
What's important to you being somebody that's helping other people? Do you, it's probably important for you to stay on point and for you to have your goals and for you to stay lean and all these different things, right?
Yeah, as far as my own training goes, my goals are just to like be as jacked as possible and train jiu-jitsu and have fun. Like I was telling my boy Zach recently, he was asking me like, do you want any more lifting PRs? And I was like, honestly, I don't think so. Like, I think it'd be cool if I hit an all-time deadlift PR or bench PR, but I don't really care that much about those. Like, I just want to be jacked and feel great, like feel as best as I could possibly be, train jiu-jitsu and get better at jiu-jitsu, and then dump the rest of my energy and resources into serving these athletes. Like, I freaking love that. I love coaching. I love being able to take the gifts that I feel like God has blessed me with and the knowledge that I've been able to acquire and help athletes. That's like the coolest thing. So I'm just trying to get jacked and do jiu-jitsu a lot.
I love it. I think there's, new PRs though on the horizon for everybody if you're creative, so as somebody that, maybe you're not into powerlifting anymore. So maybe a 1 rep max on a deadlift just isn't as much of a thing, but maybe occasionally you load up a trap bar deadlift and go for something on that. Or maybe you try to find a new way to move on something. You might recognize that when you get put in certain positions in jiu-jitsu that you're stiff or tight, or you see somebody, and Nsima does this a lot, you see something on like Instagram, you see someone do like a back bridge or something, you're like, I'm not gonna hurt myself, but let me see if I can start to build a capacity for some of that. So I think a lot of times when somebody shifts from like one sport to another, or when they move away from powerlifting, they think, oh, my best stuff is sort of behind me, but there's still so much, even if you just start to run and you just say, I want to run 2 miles in under 20 minutes. That's like, well, that's a really good start, and you can get PRs on that, especially because we mentioned earlier, like if you're not very good at something or not really proficient at something, it's easier to get better at it and won't cost you as much.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. And I should have clarified. I'm currently in my own training pulling from Mark in an old video you did where you said, if you want to hit a PR every time you train, just do something you've never done before every time you train. And I'm not necessarily doing something completely new every time.
7 reps on the preacher curl machine.
Well,
boom.
Hey, I did work up to a 6 rep max bench press, which I've never done before. So that's a big old PR.
I love it.
But yeah, I think taking that approach and just like detaching myself, at least kind of over the last 6 to 12 months, detaching myself from like, you know, these are the exercises, these are my numbers, this is my iron cred, and just detaching myself from those a little bit and being like, well, I don't really need those 3 exercises, only squat, bench, deadlift. Maybe I don't hit another lifetime PR there, but maybe one of those Steinborn presses where you're bending and pressing like that. Like if I could do that, that'd be a huge PR, even though it's not the big 3 that I was obsessed with for so long.
You're a young guy. What's it like being around younger people still? Because you still are working with like high school athletes, right?
Not as much high school athletes, but the high school athletes I used to work with, I still work with them. So they're all in college or have graduated college at this point. But it is really interesting. Like
even just a couple year difference, right, can make a big difference, right?
Yeah, I don't mean to sound like I'm some old head, but it really does keep me young. Like a lot of the terminology and like what's happening is it's just good to be connected to the youth that way. And I think
find yourself tucking your joggers into your socks.
Yeah, that was an OG wrestling thing. That came from wrestling way back in the day. But yeah, being around younger people, I think it really helps me feel like, in some ways, it helps me feel like, all right, I got to stay ahead. Like I can't let these cats like get ahead. And in other ways, it makes me really look at things differently and think like, wow, I never really thought of it that way. I don't know what it's like to experience high school in the way that you did, where you did 50% of your high school online in front of the computer. But that type of experience makes me look at things a little bit differently. It makes me look at online education differently. So when I'm building this course, how do I make it a little bit different so that way it's more engaging for someone that maybe had that experience? So yeah, it keeps me young and keeps me on my toes.
Awesome. Where can people find you to get more information, your website, all that stuff?
You can find me at Joshua Settlage everywhere, and you can also check out my website, www.thestrengthmatrix.com. If you guys want a free 4-week strength program, you go to either of those places, Instagram or thestrengthmatrix.com. You can download a free 4-week strength program.
Strength is never weakness. Weakness is never strength. Catch you guys later.
If you guys enjoyed this episode with our boy Josh Settlage, you'll enjoy more Josh Settlage and Jimmy House and myself here talking about getting jacked for Jiu Jitsu. Why wouldn't you want to get jacked for Jiu Jitsu? Do you want to do Jiu Jitsu and not be jacked? Why would you want that? You don't want that, which is why you want to go check out this episode. Get jacked for Jiu Jitsu. Click it. Go.